How's it going, guys? My name is Tavarish, and today is going to be a quick update video of, well, the aftermath of my dyno session with my Lamborghini Gallardo. If this is your first video on this car, then I would consider watching some other ones because you're going to be missing a lot of information. Now, I have linked to that in the description below, and I have linked to that in the card up above, so you guys can get all caught up. This is my 2008 Lamborghini Gallardo Spider, and it has... well, it's seen better days, but also seen worse days. So it's actually in pretty decent condition, considering how badly this car looked when I got it. Well, how badly this car performed when I got it. Now, this is right off the heels of my dyno tuning session at Cletus McFarland's dyno shop out in Tampa. And man, I mean, I don't think that the car made anywhere near its power potential, but it didn't blow up on the dyno. It didn't leak anything. Well, it didn't leak anything egregious. It did have a little bit of a power steering leak, but made it home with the car intact. And there's a few things I can do to make sure that this has the 4-digit power potential that I know it can have and I know it will have. So here's the things that I need to do before it goes on the dyno again, and here's the things I need to do before the entire project comes to a close, because we are almost at that stage where this Lambo is almost done. So right off the bat, you guys can already see this thing is really dirty. I put it on a U-Haul trailer, and going through Central Florida didn't really do it many favors. There's just bugs all over, and on a white car, it's not the best, but that can all be cleaned relatively easily. One of the things that I really wanted to figure out was the flex fuel sensor issue. Now, let me come around to the other side of the car and show you what I'm talking about. The flex fuel sensor actually lives down here. I don't want to take the spider cover off. The flex fuel sensor lives down here. It goes off the return line from the fuel system, and what it does is it measures how much ethanol is in the fuel. So there's ethanol, and then there's gasoline, and I want this thing to run on a mixture of E85 and gasoline, even though I can put in 93, which is premium gasoline, and I can also put in straight E85 or E98 or whatever I can find at the time. I want this thing to run everything, well, everything other than diesel. So the flex fuel sensor, the operation of that is really integral to this whole project. So if we come back here, we can see this whole wiring mess. Now, this looks bad, I know, but it actually isn't that horrible. So what I did was I was toying around with different pinouts, because when we were dyno tuning it, when we were trying to dyno tune it, the flex fuel sensor was giving us a weird reading. Sometimes it would say voltage failure. It would just say there's no voltage, no signal coming to it. So that led me to believe that maybe it was the flex fuel sensor itself. We tested that. It wasn't that. Maybe it was the wiring. So we tested that. We have 12 volts coming into here. We have a good ground going right to the body right here, and that is actually shared with the ECU ground. And we have the signal, and the signal is going to one of the pins. Now, this is pin 73. This is actually a configurable input for the Scavenge S12, and this should be good for this kind of signal. What I've learned is that sometimes these flex fuel sensors need something called a pull-up resistor, meaning that when it outputs voltage on the signal wire, it needs a resistor from a 12-volt source wired inline to make it pull up to around that 5-volt figure that this thing needs to see. So I was thinking that maybe it's that, but I actually emailed Scavenge about this, and they said that you don't need a pull-up resistor because you just need to configure it as a thermistor instead of a 5-volt input. So that already has a pull-up resistor sort of mod included in the S12 system. I know this is really kind of geeky stuff, and I promise you that it makes sense, but this basically means that whatever happened on a calibration level, not a hardware level. So what I'm going to do, well, in future episodes, to make sure that this works, is I'm going to revert it back to an older tune to make sure that this is working properly, because before I went and tried to dyno tune this, it was sort of working properly. Hopefully it's not a hardware issue with the ECU itself, but it's very, very rare that these things go bad. They're actually quite robust. If it's just a calibration issue, which I think it is, then we should be able to have it work flawlessly when I revert it to an older tune. So I'm going to try that in a future episode. The next thing I want to talk about is back here. So you guys have maybe noticed that there was some blue smoke coming out from the exhaust pipes, and you don't want to have blue smoke in the exhaust because that means you're burning oil. The good thing about it is that it's not burning blue smoke when I decelerate, meaning that the piston rings are likely good. The piston rings and valve guides are likely good. It only has blue smoke when I accelerate quite rapidly or go into boost. So that means that it's likely one of the turbos, and since I had a problem with one of these turbos, actually this turbo in particular, then that means that it's likely coming from here. Now these turbos have oil seals in them, and what happens when the oil seals go, particularly when this return line, when that gets backed up, that basically goes in here and it comes out the exhaust. So we have a little bit of evidence of that problem still happening. You can see right here, there's like little specks here, and that is actually the oil going through the V-band flange. I think that there's a little bit of a leak there. I can fix that. But there's some oil coming through here, and it's just splattering everything. So what I'm thinking is happening is that even though this is gravity fed, it's still at a very horizontal angle, and if it backs up, it's really easy for this to back up into the housing itself, and then with the around about 60 psi of oil pressure when this thing starts up, it's gonna back up and go into the exhaust. So it's not a horrible problem, but it's only under wide open throttle, which is manageable. So what I'm gonna do is something that a lot of people have actually told me to do, and I haven't dismissed it, but I haven't thought that I needed it for this, but it makes sense. And what I'm talking about is a scavenge pump. So what a scavenge pump does is it takes these oil return lines, and you can actually mount this anywhere. So I think I'm going to mount it up there somewhere. I'm not sure if you can see it. It's a little bit dark, but I'm going to mount that scavenge pump up there and run these oil return lines for both turbos into a Y fitting, and then run that into the scavenge pump. It's going to suck up all the return oil, and then it's going to go directly, instead of going into the bottom of the engine, it's actually going to go straight up into the oil tank itself. Instead of the oil return being an integral part of changing the oil because the oil drain plug now gets replaced, this is now going to be its own sort of system where if I have to change one line, I don't have to drain the entire contents of the oil. The bad part about this is I am going to have to drain the entire contents of the oil because I will have to take out that oil tank and make sure that I have a bulkhead fitting on there, or I might just weld on a fitting on the top to make sure that this all drains properly. So that is going to be a project for perhaps next week, because I just ordered a TurboWorks EXA pump, which is one of the best pumps for scavenging that you can get. So that should fit the bill just fine. So I'm not going to have any more oil issues, because that is a little bit annoying, especially when there's a little bit of an oil leak, and it's just not good, especially for a Lamborghini. The next thing is, you can see that there's a sizable gap here, and I haven't been able to figure out why there's a gap, but I wager it's because this intercooler actually sits a little bit too high. So what I'm going to do is, there's a bracket here that holds this entire clamshell on, and if I just take off maybe a 1/4 inch from that bracket, it's just an aluminum bracket, if I just take off a 1/4 inch from that bracket, then I can lower this down a little bit, and this can fit flush, because that's what I need to finish off the bodywork before I put on the bumper. This is what I need to finish off the bodywork so this can go to the body shop. Another thing that I need to do, I really need to do, is figure out this top. The top is, it's one of the more complicated things on this car. And if you want to talk about expensive, I mean, the engine's expensive, but the top is like, it's very proprietary. There are no other cars that use this sort of system. So I'm going to need to be really creative. When the car was on fire, not only was this a casualty, but the fire went underneath the wheel well. And that's where all the hydraulic lines for the system actually live. So one of the hydraulic lines actually got bubbles in it. And I think when it got bubbles in it, it melted part of it together. And when I went to take off the hydraulic ram, it actually wouldn't retract. So that means that there was a blockage in the system. So what I need is to get 2 new lines going from here, round about here, into the distribution block back here. And you can actually see that block behind, yeah, it's right here. So I think I can get the fittings. I know my friend Tony, the welding Jedi, his friend actually has a company that sells a bunch of hydraulic fittings and has different hoses and whatnot. So I'm gonna see if I can try to get this sort of fitting this sort of fitting with a line made up, because otherwise I can't really find this fitting, this line by itself. It's really, really hard to find. I can probably adapt something from a different car, but I'm not sure if that's exactly what I need. So this is gonna have to be, again, DIY and completely custom. Coming around to the front, there's actually not much to talk about, except for the fact that the front lift system still works a little bit wonkily. Wonkily is a word, right? Wonkily donkily. Okay, so the front lift works as sort of it's intended. If I press the button, it goes up, but then I have to engage something in the computer. I have to remap the computer itself to make it go down again with that press of the button. A few of you have given me a really good piece of advice and something called a latching relay. And the latching relay is something that I'm going to install later this week, maybe even in the next episode. And what it does is it lets you press a button, something does a thing, and then you press a button again and it does the reverse of said thing. So that is going to be perfect for this application. I'm not sure if that's really going to work. Everything is experimental because, again, not a lot of people have these cars, but I think this should work for our application. So it's going to require a little bit of coding from me as far as the Cyvex engagement, as far as the ECU is concerned, but I think it's totally doable. And I'm going to have parts lists for you, and I'm going to have all of that good stuff. Now, as far as the cosmetics are concerned, this definitely needs to go to the body shop, and I do have a body shop in mind that is going to do a phenomenal job, but I will have to do something about these blue calipers. I will be painting them pretty soon, and I have a new bumper coming in. You guys have seen it in a previous video, but I haven't installed it. I haven't even fitted up, so that is going to be coming up. I'm going to have to do some custom stuff because this is protruding just a little bit more than I'd like, so we might have to cut that brand new bumper, but it's going to look cool, I promise. It might look even a little Mad Maxy, which is really awesome. But right here, you can see these are the provisions for the stock, the stock spoiler. Stock spoiler comes up at speed, and since I don't have the stock spoiler and I have a carbon fiber Superleggera spoiler that needs some real repair, these are going to be deleted. I have to delete this entire system, and then we just install that SL spoiler for that really mean look. But the main thing I really want to take care of is the fact that this thing doesn't really rev, doesn't really start as well as it should. Now, I have to email Cyvex. I have to talk to them to see if maybe they can give me a base map just to get this car running and revving, because when it doesn't run right, when it dies all the time, that really doesn't bode well for me trying to get it on a trailer, me trying to drive it, and all that stuff. I want this car to be smooth as silk. Well, maybe not silk. It's going to be a little bit rough around the edges, but I want it to be at least drivable because I want to take this thing on rallies. I want to take this thing on sort of cruises, and I want to take this thing to half-mile events. I want this thing to be a very, very capable car. And for us to go to half-mile events, this has to make good power, so we need a good baseline. I know Jeremy, the tuner that I got, the Faster Proms tuner, He actually is very, very capable, but he's never dealt with Cyvex in his life, so it was a learning experience for everybody. I know I did poo-poo the Cyvex system just a little bit. I was frustrated. Honestly, it's a very good system, but it's just not very user-friendly if you're getting to it as a novice. So it's not like an Apex SAFC where all you have to do is, you know, go up or down and you increase fuel or ignition. This is something that really involves a lot of skill and dedication and a lot of time. So I really want to get this car tuned. I think this can make more than 1,000 horsepower, just because it made 572 to the tires, which roundabout means I want to say close to 700 horsepower at the crank, which ain't bad considering that we didn't throw any timing at it at all. Man, there's a lot of yard work going on. We didn't throw any timing at it at all, and it was basically revving out to like 6 grand. So I have a lot of high hopes for this car. This is going to be a real good platform, and when they say that it can make 1,600 horsepower on this engine, I really believe it. So I think 1,000 is well within the range of this car, and me getting a good base tune or a good baseline to get this car started and idling and running properly, that's going to be really integral. So I'm going to try to get that going in the next episodes, and maybe I'll even do an episode about me trying to feather that clutch and learn how to drive it, because so far this clutch has been super grabby. I know it's brand new, but I've heard that these clutches are way more pliable, way more forgiving when you drive them for a little bit. So I want to see if that's the case. So I'm going to do a lot of trial and error and try to learn how to drive this car, relearn how to drive this car, because I've been driving manual for quite a long time, and this is the first car that's really given me this big of an issue. Well, this big of a challenge. So that is going to be it. Actually, I'm lying. There's one more thing. When I was on the dyno, I noticed, actually, I didn't mention, this intercooler, this heat exchanger, I noticed that it was getting quite hot. Now, it's not hot now, even though the ambient temperature is around 100 degrees right now in Florida. There's water running through this all the time. And we were stationary, so we didn't have a ton of airflow going through, even though we had a good fan. So this was getting actually hotter than it should be. Jeremy was saying, hey, this intercooler, or rather the front mount heat exchanger, was getting pretty hot, and I agreed with him. So we're gonna have to figure out why that is. I think it's because the aluminum tank that is, the reservoir for the entire water system, it's actually next to an exhaust. It's basically like 3 or 4 inches away from a really hot exhaust. It is coated, the exhaust is coated, but there's still a lot of heat in that engine bay. So I'm thinking I have to coat that aluminum water tank. It used to be an air tank. The aluminum water tank, and I don't know, figure some way to get that water isolated from the rest of the heat in the engine bay. That is really integral, because if we have hot water there, that means it's not going to do as good of a job at cooling the intake air temperature charge, and the intake air temperature charge means that, a hot IAT, intake air temp, means that we have less timing, less boost, less power. We don't want any of that. So I have to figure all that out, but this thing is coming along. I am so happy that this is coming along in such good fashion. Now, I know I always say quick update. This is far from a quick update. I don't know how long I've been talking, but I just wanted to go over everything that I need to do on this car. And I wanted you guys to have an update that's worth watching, so you guys can actually see what goes into a project just like this. So until next time, this is me telling you that on cars like this, that look really awesome and will perform really awesomely, you guys need to wrench every day. See you later.